My Hero, a Ghost Story by Sophie Duncan. You are so boring, Patty complained, making a face while she shoved her hands deep into her coat pockets, and adding a harumph as she glared up at the gleaming modern front of the university's library. Lucy turned and looked up at it too. But for her, there was a new, special rush. After a month of waiting for review, the librarians had approved her application to use the restricted section, the inner sanctum of postgraduates and research professors only. And she was a postgrad. That little thrill hadn't stopped since she'd enrolled for her PhD at St Acres University at the end of September. Lucy Holmes, bona fide research student. Library on a Friday night. You are going to give us postgrads a bad name, Patty whined, as Lucy turned and smiled at her, and nodded her head in the direction of the Students' Union. Sure you wouldn't prefer a double vodka and coke? Lucy shook her head immediately. She was far too excited about the pass that was waiting for her at the reception desk, just inside the huge glass doors up the steps. It was geeky, but she didn't care. This was a step on her way to the lecturer job she wanted. Just a little one, but one she was proud of. She'd submitted the proposal for her paper to both her supervisor and the library almost as soon as she'd been given her desk. And both had approved her area of research, an area that needed access to the valuable and protected manuscripts in the restricted section. I'll see you later, Lucy tried to pacify her friend. If you don't, I'll come and rescue you, Patty promised, nudging playfully with her elbow. Rescue? Lucy snorted at the way her companion's eyes had narrowed, and she was grinning widely. Oh, Patty giggled, then clapped her hands. Oh, the newbie doesn't know. Lucy crossed her arms and stared at her overly jubilant friend. She paused mid-giggle and waggled her head at Lucy, mischief in her manner. Ordinarily, that fey attitude to life was the one that Lucy rather liked, since it was so different to her own more bookish habits. But standing on the chilly library steps, with the sun already a memory on the horizon, she was not so keen. Our illustrious library is haunted, Patty announced, waving her arm dramatically up at the building, and following her statement with the obligatory woo-woo. Only by Jack! Lucy instantly denied the shiver that idea sent down her spine, and she squinted through the doors at the student librarian who was manning the front desk. The place is way too new for any spooks. Ah, but this one is a modern spook. Well, 25 years anyway, Patty carried on with some relish. And the ghost wanders around the restricted section. Now you are making it up, Lucy chided, a little annoyed. I am not going drinking with you. All right, Patty backed off, palms up in reconciliation. See you later, book lover. Lucy never stayed mad at Patty for long, and she nodded her goodbyes before heading up the steps. However, as she ascended, Patty yelled up behind her, So you don't want to hear about your ghost then? No, she threw over her shoulder, but was smiling as she did it, and then she was inside. The first thing that hit her was the warmth after the chilly night outside, and Lucy undid her coat as she approached the raised reception desk manned by Jack. He was a skinny, bespectacled student with unruly, slightly greasy hair, who did the evening shift at the library. Of course, he was reading a large tome that was perched on the edge of the desk, at something of a worrying angle. Lucy didn't know his surname, but she had met him when inquiring about the restricted section access her first evening on campus, and he had been very helpful, so she greeted brightly, "Hello, Jack!" "Good evening, Lucy," he beamed at her. They had both recognised a fellow bookworm on their first meeting, and she watched that smile as he continued, "Are you here for the hallowed pass?" Lucy laughed and nodded. However, she settled onto her heels as Jack picked up a plastic card from below the part of the desk she could see and held it out. She paused. This was it, the start of what she had been planning, in one way or another, since she was 14. Access to the Downe Family papers. And Lucy couldn't help it, she was madly excited. Jack seemed to understand and just waited as, slowly, Lucy reached out and took her new pass. He smiled at her as he relinquished the card, and she felt her cheeks heat up. She was being silly, but it didn't make any difference to the butterflies in her stomach. "I'll take you upstairs and introduce you to Miss Frith, the holder of the keys to the kingdom." Jack broke the moment by standing up and hopping down from behind the desk. "Oh, that's all right. I can find my way," Lucy replied. In fact, she had loitered so many times on the third floor at the back, just beyond the private domain, that she thought she could find it blindfold. "I am solemnly bound to get you to Miss Frith for your introductory tour." "No one is allowed past her without the tour," Jack returned, hand on heart. "You make it sound so very ominous," Lucy laughed again, absurdly excited about it all. Jack chuckled as well, and as they headed towards the lifts, added conspiratorially, "We have all decided she lives up there. I never see her come down, and I know she's technically day shift." "I don't think I've ever seen her either," Lucy agreed, as the doors to the lift opened for them. "Her desk has always been empty when I've been up there before." Jack indicated for her to go first, and Lucy stepped into the lift. She let him hit the button for the top floor as Jack half faced her and continued their conversation. "I think she spends most of her time in the stacks, guarding her treasure like an old dragon." Jack shrugged and winked at her irreverently. The observation proved accurate, because the old-fashioned wooden desk that had a nameplate saying Miss J. Frith propped up on it was standing abandoned in front of the frosted glass walls. An access-controlled door that marked out the front of the restricted section. "Typical," Jack huffed and walked ahead of Lucy, right up to the translucent barrier, leaning in and shielding his eyes from the brighter light of the outside as he peered in. Lucy wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he didn't find it because he turned around and shrugged. "Can't see her moving around in there." Lucy glanced down at the neat desk that didn't really look used, but there was no bell or anything else to summon the restricted section librarian, and a heavy disappointment began to form in her belly. However, Jack did not seem so dismayed. "Look, she can be a funny old bird. She knew you were coming this evening, so it won't be any surprise for you to be in there. She may be a bit prickly with you, but if you need to get on, I can give the tour." "Oh yes, please," Lucy heard herself gushing, but she couldn't help it, and she allowed Jack a little puff of pride as she practically begged to accept his offer. "Right you are then," Jack nodded smartly and waved her towards the door. "Let's try out your card." Lucy walked up to the reader and swiped her card over it. She let the breath of anticipation become a grin of bookish joy when it flashed green. Jack pushed one of the double doors open and led the way in. Lucy followed and was instantly hit with a wave of cooler air. She shivered. The doors do have a slow close mechanism, but you must make sure they are fully closed behind you at all times," Jack began, much more seriously than he had on the outside. "This is a climate-controlled area." Lucy nodded, but her attention flicked away from them then, because spreading out in an avenue in front of her were ceiling-high stacks full of the old, the obscure, and the valuable. She couldn't see much from where they were standing, and it was disappointingly modern. No dark wooden shelves, but the place was huge, with further avenues left and right. There was a mumble from her right, which brought Lucy back to ground, and she turned to Jack and apologised. "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that." "Sorry," Jack signed back at her, and drew Lucy up short. She slipped easily into signing mode and indicated back, "You know sign?" Jack then held his hands up, his pale cheeks colouring, and he said, "That was about my limit. Only just started learning." "Thank you for trying," Lucy replied back, both in sign and speech. "I noticed your device when we first met," Jack shrugged, speaking a little more slowly as he glanced at where Lucy's cochlear implant was mainly hidden under her hair behind her right ear. Lucy reached up self-consciously. The augmentation she'd had since she was 7 didn't normally bother her, but Jack seemed quite interested. Still, she wanted a tour, so she explained quickly, "After I was born, I lost my hearing gradually until I was mostly deaf by the time I was 5. My mum's deaf too, so I learnt sign alongside speaking. And then when I was 7, I had this put in. It helps most of the time, but I lip read too." Jack nodded earnestly, clearly more curious about her deafness, but Lucy had finished her standard spiel. Only friends got more. So she glanced back towards the wonders that awaited them. Jack took the hint. "No resources can be removed from here, and gloves must be worn when handling everything. You will find pears in small, medium and large on the ends of each stack," he told her, escorting her down the main aisle, indicating to little boxes hanging left and right. "Please return your gloves to the appropriate box when you have finished with them." It was Lucy's turn to nod sincerely as Jack paused. Seemingly satisfied, he then continued, "No book may be removed from the restricted area. You must use one of the reading tables, which can be found throughout the room. Once finished, do not place books or manuscripts back in storage yourself. Leave them at the collection points near the reading tables, and a librarian will replace them. You may take your own notes, and, with our modern age, take flashless photographs on your phone for your own personal reference. But these items cannot be photocopied. Some are available as scanned images on the library system. You can check with any librarian if you are unsure." Jack's delivery was perfect and professional, and Lucy nodded again, although she already knew the Downe manuscripts were not part of the online collection. "The library is open 24 hours a day to anyone with a student card, and your new pass gives you the same access here. There are no librarians on duty after 10 p.m, but campus security are available 24/7. We do recommend you download the Safe With Us app for your phone, which gives you emergency contact ability, although the signal in this part of the building can be patchy. There is also CCTV on all entrances and public spaces for safety and security." "And the books." Lucy chuckled at her own joke, but Jack's expression said he took it seriously. Lucy made a mental note not to make more book jokes with librarians. "Well," she began again, tentatively, to check if the tour and lecture was over, and as Jack visibly relaxed, she took that as an affirmative and signed and said, "Thank you." That appeared to be the right thing to do, because Jack beamed at her and returned, "No, thank you," and continued enthusiastically when his signing ran out, for being a patron. It's great to have folks like you so passionate about our treasures, like we librarians are. If you need anything, I'll be around. Even if I'm not at my desk, you can bleep me from any of the call points." He waggled the brick of a mobile phone that was in a holster at his belt. "Work issue. No touchscreen or anything," he continued more self-consciously as he noted Lucy looking at the device. "But the powers that be insist the older tech has better battery life." Lucy shrugged in a way that she hoped was both non-committal and conciliatory, and then deliberately turned to the nearest great stack, letting her oar come back to the surface. A few seconds later, she just about remembered to turn back around to say goodbye, but her guide was gone. Selfishly, Lucy was a little glad she was finally alone, and she headed straight to the nearest computer terminal on the end of a stack and entered her search, Downe Family Archive. Lucy bounced on her toes as she waited the second or so for her search to come up. This was it, her chance to prove the theory she had postulated to herself at 14. John Downe, according to most scholars, if they even knew about him, was a small-time poet and dramatist contemporary to Shakespeare. His body of work was small, just a few sonnets and one play, but in Lucy's opinion exquisite, far out surpassing Old Will's hackery. He had clearly, like most dramatists of the time, been influenced by others, especially Shakespeare. But that was where Lucy's theory came in. She didn't think, like others, that his work was derivative of the great bard. She thought Downe had been trained by him. Downe came from a noble family, and Lucy had, some would say, leapt to a conclusion as to why Shakespeare had taken on such a pupil in later life. She thought John Downe was William Shakespeare's son by one of his patrons, Lady Juliet Downe, and she was sure that somewhere in the Downe family archive would be the clues she needed to prove her case. Lady Downe had been a prolific letter writer to friends and family, and of course her favourite playwright, and Lucy's first paper was going to be investigating Juliet and her relationship to Shakespeare, setting the groundwork for the first step in proving her theory. Information delivered, locating her quarry took Lucy a few minutes, since she was unfamiliar with the layout, so she was a little lost by the time she found herself standing in front of a shelf that held dozens of large, carefully preserved books. She'd known Juliet's and other Downe members' notes and correspondence had been bound into one volume sometime in the 19th century, but actually looking at that tome, neatly inscribed on the spine with the family name and crest in gold, made her heart beat faster. Reverently, gloves in place, she reached for the book. It was heavy. Lucy liked the weight. It added gravitas to her actions as she lowered it down and turned to carry it to the reading table she had passed 2 stacks back. A shadow moved at the far end of the shelving. Lucy blinked, but the shape was gone, leaving her unsure of what she had seen. A prickle of fright ran up Lucy's neck, but she blinked again, and all that she could see was the slightly brighter area in the avenue between the stacks. Not that anything in this hallowed place had very high lighting. Holding her prize against her chest, her armour against the scare, Lucy focused back on her excitement and heading to her reading desk. 2 minutes later, Lucy had the book open on the table at the first page, and her tablet was out for note-taking, and as she sat down in the rather comfy chair that went with the wide dark wood table, she reached up and turned off her implant. The world went silent, and Lucy's attention immediately closed down on the work ahead of her. In seconds she was immersed in the Elizabethan world of the Downe family. It quickly became apparent that the Downes were a family of note-makers. The collection of papers ranged from receipts and accounts to aid-memoirs for the copious letters they had sent. but the notes that caught Lucy's eye were a set of reports that her governess had made about the young Juliet to her mother and father. They made for interesting reading, revealing a precocious girl who, although she was 20 years her junior, styled herself on her heroine, Queen Elizabeth I. Juliet was a scholar, a musician, and a writer, and Lucy was lost in deciphering a short story about Juliet's pet dog, Ambrose, when a flicker of movement in her left peripheral vision made Lucy glance up. There was nothing there. That was obvious even to Lucy's blurry vision as she tried to focus far away for the first time in too long. That prickle was back, and she found herself turning her attention to the other side of the table. She froze, as looking at her, chest height with the furniture, was a boy, 5 or 6, Lucy's brain guessed. Mouse brown hair stuck up from his head at odd angles, and his round face had a large smudge of something on one cheek. But it was his wide gaze that fixed Lucy to her seat. She couldn't help it when her thoughts jumped back to Patty's ghostly warning. However, slowly the child smiled and he signed, "Hello, my name is David." The action cut right through Lucy's superstition, and she replied with relief, "Hello, I'm Lucy." They regarded each other for a moment more, before something occurred to Lucy, and she continued with a wry smile, "Should you be in here?" David grinned back and shuffled on the spot, before he admitted, "Mummy lets me stay back there when she's working," he indicated on the far side of the restricted section, "but I'm not supposed to bother people." He looked a little guilty then, but not much, and Lucy waggled her head and winked as she realised why Miss Frith spent a lot of time in the stacks rather than at her desk. "I won't tell if you won't," she signed. David giggled, and even though she couldn't hear him, it brought a small laugh out of Lucy too. It was nice to be able to sign with someone again. She missed the conversations with her mum, and although Patty had tried for a little bit, they had both lazily fallen back on Lucy's implant to aid their communication in the end. "Are you deaf, David?" Lucy asked, also in sign. He nodded, a flash of sadness sweeping his young features. "So am I." David nodded again, and his grin was instantly back. "I saw your—" he indicated behind his ear. "Cochlear implant," Lucy signed for him, and he mirrored the new sign back at her. She approved with a smile and a nod. "I can't have one," David shrugged as he signed. "Mummy says I'm just fine as I am, but not many people can talk to me. Do you mind if I talk to you a bit longer?" Lucy's own experience as she had gradually lost her hearing and her ability to fully interact with her friends meant that Juliet Downe took a back seat to her sympathy for the isolated child, and, without hesitation, she nodded. She pulled out the chair next to her and patted the seat. However, as David headed around the end of the table, vibrations from the wood ran through Lucy's fingers and up her arm. At the same time, David came to an abrupt halt, humour disappearing from his face, and Lucy followed his attention over her left shoulder. A woman in a smart two-piece suit, hair tied tightly at the nape of her neck, with overly large glasses perched on her nose, withdrew her hand from where she had been rapping on the desk and clasped it together with her other one primly in front of her. Lucy hastily flicked on her implant once more, and the world of sound came slamming back. It always made her a little unsettled, so she squinted at their new companion. She was glad when the stranger spoke first. "I do hope David was not disturbing you, Miss Holmes." The signing told Lucy who this woman was, Miss Frith, and David was looking up at her guiltily. "Not at all," she signed and spoke back when David glanced at her for an answer. "I'm enjoying his company." Miss Frith stroked her son's crown, and he leant against her. She almost smiled, but there was concern in her eyes as well. Nevertheless, he is not allowed to bother our patrons when they are working. Say sorry to Miss Holmes, David. His signs half hidden behind his mother, David did say sorry. Now, go in the back, the woman directed, her features soft but serious. David hung his head and plodded off. Lucy, trying to cheer him up, smiled and waved, adding, "See you again," as an afterthought. The boy managed a slight curl of his lip, and Lucy regretted that they'd been interrupted, but she was not about to go against her mother's wishes. Miss Frith watched her son disappear into the stacks and then turned back to Lucy. "Thank you for being so kind to him, Miss Holmes." "Lucy, please, and the pleasure was mine. I don't get to sign enough any more." "Alison," Miss Frith revealed her first name with a polite nod of her head, "and I shall not disturb you any more. You must be busy working this late." Lucy checked her watch, and only just resisted swearing due to company. It was well past midnight. Patty was going to kill her. "I lost track of time," Lucy replied, standing up and beginning to sort out her things. Despite her tablet, she had loads of little bits of paper scattered around as well, where she had been unconsciously mimicking the Downes' note-taking habit. "Good night, Lucy." "Good night, Alison," Lucy replied distractedly, but when she looked up, Alison was already gone. Lucy packed up in record time, leaving the precious book for reshelving as she had been instructed by Jack. Of course, he was no longer at his desk when she went flying through the lobby and out of the doors, and there was no security in sight either. It was only as she ended up outside in the cold, with only pools of light to walk between across the campus, that she remembered the information about the Safe With Us app for her phone, and she regretted not installing it before she left the building. Yet it was late. She was late, and she just wanted to get back to the house she shared with Patty and 3 other students, just off the far side of the campus. Sticking her hands in her pockets and putting her head down, she strode off towards home. The night around her was still, but it was a world away from the safe silence of the library as she walked away from the main building at the centre of the campus and towards the tree-lined routes that led home. The paths were lit by lamp-posts every 10 metres or so, but they were rather old, and their light hung in dull yellow cones, leaving the rest of the night as dark and moonless as if they did not exist. Since she'd arrived, Lucy had become accustomed to this walk as the nights drew in, but in the wee hours, and after Patty's talk of ghosts, it all felt a little less ordinary. Lucy found herself looking around on high alert. The hairs on the back of her neck were rising steadily, and Lucy's heart pumped faster at every shadow made worse by the unearthly stillness of the rest of the night. Fear increasing, Lucy walked faster, glancing left and right into the neatly placed trees, straining to identify every shape. Lucy was working on instinct, and she didn't know why she looked behind, but she zeroed in on movement, human movement. Just a momentary shift of one darkness against another, but Lucy knew it was a person. Man or ghost, she didn't care. In a heartbeat, Lucy was sprinting down the path. The someone followed. Lucy couldn't hear them, couldn't see them, but she felt them, and she ran as fast as she could, straight down the path, in and out of the cones of light, until finally she was on the street and much brighter lighting. Yet Lucy didn't stop. She hurtled down the hill and across the road, her legs burning as she pushed herself up the steep road that led to her house. She'd never been so glad to see the tatty front door of the 3-storey townhouse, and she grabbed the key from her pocket. It took her several tries to get the key into the Yale lock, because she was shaking with terror and effort, and kept looking behind to see if her pursuer had caught up. There was no one, but she still fell hastily through the door as it opened and slammed it behind her. Gasping and shivering, Lucy staggered past the lounge and unlocked her own room. She hit the light switch, almost blinding herself, but she shut the door and stood the bolt across without needing to see. She threw herself onto her bed, landing in a breathless heap. It took many long gasps, and even longer minutes, staring at the ceiling, for Lucy to calm down. However, as she did, a sense of foolishness crept up on her, taking the place of fear. Kicking herself for being so jumpy, Lucy stuck her elbow into the mattress and pushed herself up. Mattresses weren't supposed to crinkle when you leant on them, so Lucy looked under where she had been lying to find a couple of pages of photocopy topped with a note that could only have been scrawled by one person. "Hey, bitch," it started with Patty's usual flair. "Stand me up, would you? You knew that place would never let me in when I came looking. Well, I took a leaf out of your book, sugar, and I did some research. Check out these ghost stories from the campus newspaper." "No ghost? Right. P." Lucy brought her legs up under her on the bed and stared at the two bits of paper, not really wanting to read them, but a niggle of curiosity preventing her from just bunging them in the bin. Deciding she'd apologise to and then kill Patty in the morning, the knowledge seeker in Lucy beat down the coward, and she began to read the first article. 6th of December 1991. Death in the Library. The headline sounded like something out of Agatha Christie, but there was a photo of the huge library building with the back half of the top floor burnt completely out. Yesterday, a fire broke out in the special collections section of the campus library. The alarm alerted everyone in the building to the fire, and everyone escaped except for a beloved librarian, Alison Frith, and her young son, David. Lucy's skin prickled in shock. Urgently she kept reading. According to a reliable source within the library, Alison would bring David with her when she was working late, due to not having anyone to leave him with who could support his profound deafness. She would let him play at the back of the library in a storeroom. No one knew he was up there yesterday, and investigators believe the fire trapped David when he could not hear the fire alarm. His mother had gone down to the first floor to follow up an inquiry for a patron, but witnesses say she ran up into the flames to try and rescue her boy. Tributes have been flooding in for Alison from students and staff alike, and a day of remembrance is planned for next Monday. Alison leaves behind a younger sister, Jennifer. Lucy stopped reading, chills now running all over her body as the implications of the story sunk in. It was impossible. There was no such thing as ghosts. Yet there was a second article, and she couldn't avoid the headline, "Ghosts in the Library." David had been so sweet, and Alison such a real caring mother. They had both been standing in front of her. She had liked them, really liked them. Ghosts were supposed to be scary, and Lucy was instinctively scared now, weirded out, disbelieving, but also torn. Unable to stop herself, she read on. Our university is proud of the new state-of-the-art restricted section that has been built on the ashes of the old special collections area of our library. But there is trouble in the climate-controlled paradise as strange stories spread across campus. Apparently more than one privileged researcher has walked out of there with their hair on end due to paranormal phenomena. Books moving by themselves, cold winds, even a sighting of a little boy playing amongst the new shelves. Are the ghosts of Alison Frith and her son David, who died in the fire, really stalking the stacks? Or is it just overactive imaginations? Lucy didn't sleep that night. At first she stared at the wall, not knowing if she wanted to hide under the covers or scream denial until she was hoarse. Of course, she did neither, as both reactions warred for supremacy and lost. Instead, her brain ran the information over and over again. The lovely encounter with David. She hadn't been scared at all, but then he'd seemed like a perfectly solid, living child. Now he wasn't. The fear kept prickling out over her skin as she thought about the amount of time she spent with the unalive. And Alison. Lucy thought she could have been friends with the prim woman, if she'd been breathing. Lucy's feelings were all very messy, and added to that the fact that she wanted to get back into the restricted section to carry on her research, but maybe not with a pair of ghosts dropping by at midnight. Lucy was in a quandary for more of the remaining dark hours. It was only as the sky began to lighten that any sort of logic began to impinge. Although it couldn't chase away what Lucy knew to have happened, the sunlight did calm her nerves and make her a little braver. There was only one way she was ever going to know if she could stand to carry on with her research among ghosts, and that was to go back and face her fears. 10 p.m. that night, Lucy stared up over the full 3 stories, her attention going to the top floor windows. Light shone out 1 or 2, but all others were dark thanks to the movement-activated lighting, but it gave her some courage to know she wouldn't be alone in the building. Still, it had taken Lucy all day and most of the evening to build up the nerve to follow through on her dawn plan, and she was glad when she spotted Jack tidying up at his reception desk. He looked up at her as she took the first step towards the entrance, and Lucy waved, taking his resultant smile as a reason to carry on in. "Good evening, Lucy," he signed haltingly. "Good evening to you too," she replied. "2 nights in a row, you are keen," Jack carried on vocally, leaning down over her from his raised position, "although it is lovely to see you again." "I'm enjoying my research," Lucy explained quickly, a little unnerved by his proximity, and she turned towards the lift. "Are you finding what you need? Can I help?" Jack carried on enthusiastically, skirting round his desk and catching up to Lucy. "I'm doing very well, thank you. And don't you finish about now?" She tried to let him down as politely as possible. "I don't mind helping such a clearly dedicated patron as you," her companion gushed back, well on the wrong side of familiar. "Thanks, but I prefer to work alone," Lucy dismissed more directly and stepped into the lift. Thankfully, Jack did not follow, but he was frowning as the doors closed between them. Lucy was already regretting not taking up Jack's offer of support by the time the lift doors opened on the top floor. It was gloomy outside compared to the lift light, and she stepped out into the big open space reluctantly. Her heart was in her throat as she headed towards the back of the building, even the ping of the lift behind her making her jump. It felt like forever as she counted each step, making herself take each one as the knot in her belly grew until Miss Frith's empty desk was in sight. Miss J. Frith, Jennifer, Alison's sister, who spent most of her time among the stacks. Was she looking for her sister, or did she spend all her time talking to her? Lucy had hoped that, for once, the elusive librarian would be at her desk. Someone alive, someone who knew, someone she could talk to. But it was not to be. So Lucy stood next to the empty desk for a moment, breathing deeply and trying to settle her nerves. Had she fallen asleep and dreamed it all? Was she allergic to the rarefied atmosphere protecting the books? Was she being an idiot? What the hell was she going to do if she met a ghost again? All the thoughts bounced in and out of Lucy's head, not making her mood any better. So, in the end, she grabbed her pass, swiped, and charged into the restricted section in one movement. She left the door to swing shut by itself, heading off into the cool air that was giving her goosebumps. Or was that the ghosts? Lucy had only one point on her plan, so she headed to the reading desk she had been using last night. Her heart was in her throat by the time she sat down at the same chair and placed her phone on the table. she accessed the Safe With Us app that she had installed that morning, the emergency button front and foremost. Even though she had no idea what she'd tell security if she did summon them, it made her feel a little better that someone would come running if she needed them. Then, clasping her hands together on the desk in front of her, Lucy waited. Lucy didn't really remember her natural hearing, only that it was different from the increasingly sophisticated devices she had had attached behind her right ear since she was a child. She could listen to music, hold a conversation on a crowded bus, with a little help from lip reading. But as she sat in the silence of the restricted section, she could not help but think her technology was letting her down. Her fear wanted to hear every little sound, every creak of furniture, every imagined footstep. But was the implant that sensitive? Or worse, would it lie to her, make sounds up? Could she trust it? 15 years of use meant logic told her she knew the limits. She understood the implant, but in the isolated silence, she could not help scanning around herself nervously, checking all the shadows from the stacks around her, starting at nothing as her nerves made things up. Yet, then there was a sound, a footstep, then another one. Lucy was sure, and she was staring fixedly at the stack she thought they were coming from when a shape appeared from the gloom. Her anxiety was so great that it took Lucy a few seconds to realise the new arrival was very much alive. It was Jack. Recognition made her let out a bark of breath, and she had to cover with a rather pathetic laugh. And, "Jack, you scared me." "Sorry," he signed. "I just wanted to see if my most conscientious customer needed anything." "No, thank you," Lucy replied, her fright making her dismissive. "And shouldn't you be on your way home by now?" "I don't mind," Jack shrugged, and came further into the open space beside the table. "You look like you might be stuck. Do you need any help locating resources?" "No, I'm just preparing. Getting my notes ready," Lucy countered quickly, suddenly embarrassed as she reached belatedly for the tablet in her bag. She put the device on the table in front of her and flicked it on. "There's another reason you came back today, isn't there?" Jack winked, and there was a burr in his voice. "No!" Lucy denied, on the back foot, but not about to share her thoughts about ghosts with a stranger. She calmed herself and pressed, "I need to get started on my paper properly. It took a month to get approved, and I want to submit it by Christmas." "Ambitious!" Jack nodded his approval and smiled at Lucy. Maybe it was her nerves, but Lucy didn't like his grin this time. "But then you are a genius, aren't you, Lucy?" Lucy shook her head, her skin beginning to crawl with the attention. "I think John Downe is an inspired subject for your thesis." That sent a shock running down her spine, and Lucy stood up, challenging, "You've read my thesis application?" Jack paused for a second then, thoughts flashing behind his eyes, and Lucy knew she'd caught him out. She didn't think that was a good thing. However, then he smiled again and took a step towards her. She stepped to the other side of her chair. Part of the restricted section application he covered. Yet it was far too late for the lie to work, and Lucy was annoyed. So she shot back, "No, it isn't. You only needed to know about my current paper, and I never mentioned John, only Juliet." Jack paused, considering something, and staring intently at Lucy all the while. She stayed very still, aware of her phone and the Safe With Us app on the table, but not wanting to push the awkward situation just yet. In the end, Jack shrugged and took another step closer. Okay, so maybe I took a teeny peek at your student record, he admitted like it was a joke, squinting through a small gap he made with his fingers. Why would you do that? Lucy asked, her voice small and breathless. Didn't you feel the connection when we met, when I helped you with your inquiry? You were so excited, and you patted my hand when you thanked me. Lucy's heart sank like a stone as Jack continued to smile, but his eyes gained a darkness that scared her. She didn't know what to say. I had to find out more about you. Your personal statement was inspired. 14 when you decided what you wanted to study. We're alike, you and we know what we want, and we're dedicated to it. I just knew I had to look after you after that. I don't need looking after, Lucy objected, making sure her phone was in reach. You did out on the path last night. Jack was almost on the other side of the chair now, and Lucy's fear peaked. She grabbed her phone, hit the emergency button, and ran in the opposite direction to where Jack was standing. Lucy! He yelled after her as she ducked between the stacks. This time Lucy knew there was someone following her as she pelted through gaps in the shelves, ducking left and right, hoping Jack would not be able to follow her. It worked. Jack was not behind her, but panic and exertion made Lucy breathless, so when she found herself in a dark corner, she sank down into the darkness and covered her mouth with her hand, trying to muffle her own gasps. Lucy, what's the matter? Jack's uncomprehending inquiry came over the stacks to her. I only want to help you. Lucy forced herself to still completely, as she couldn't tell how far away he was. I learned to sign for you. Jack sounded petulant now. Why are you being so rude? Lucy was scared, but she was also angry, and she opened her mouth to object. However, a small shape appeared out of the gloom in front of her, shadows forming quickly into a head and body, and then David was kneeling in front of her, finger to his lips, and an urgent look in his eyes. Lucy shut her mouth. Sign only till he goes away, David motioned. Lucy nodded slowly, her skin prickling, but the living being more frightening at that moment than the dead. Are you all right? David asked silently, his expression earnest and concerned. Lucy shook her head, her eyes stinging as the awful situation caught up with her. Nothing like this had ever happened to her before. She'd always felt safe and confident, but that had gone in mere seconds. Where are you, Lucy? Jack's tone was tartar now. You can't flirt with the man and not expect him to want more. Lucy reaffirmed the hand over her mouth as Jack's intentions grew starker. There's no one else in here tonight but us. I checked. He full-on taunted this time as he sounded ever closer. We have to be friends, Lucy. Good friends. Lucy couldn't stop her breath coming in uncontrolled gulps. Don't cry, he'll hear, David urged with his hands, looking left and right and up the stacks. Is he coming? The little boy looked frightened by that idea, but Lucy had to be honest and nodded. A shadow fell across them then, and Lucy almost screamed, but a look of relief on David's face stopped her. He stood and ran to his mother, who was standing at one end of the stack. Her face was grave and she signed, "Follow me." Lucy got up as quickly as she could, really knowing now that she was glad to see her ghosts, and as Alison took David's hand and led him away, Lucy followed gratefully. Her helter-skelter dash meant Lucy was totally lost in the orderly forest of shells, so she kept her step light, her breathing as quiet as she could manage, and trailed after Alison. Lucy! Jack was not very far away, his voice sing-song, and Lucy froze. Alison, however, turned and beckoned urgently, then pointed ahead of her. Run, she signed. Lucy pushed away from the shelf she had been hugging and broke into a sprint. It was only a second later she heard the crash of books hitting the floor and realised she had knocked something off. "Lucy!" Jack bellowed this time, and she pumped her legs even faster as she dashed out into the bigger avenue at the centre of the room. She could have cried if she had had any breath to, because the front doors were in sight. Yet then there was a body close behind her. Lucy did scream this time, and a hand grabbed her shirt, whipping her around and aiming her momentum at the end of the shelf. Lucy pulled away, cloth ripping, but she could not stop herself slamming into the solid stack, her cheek colliding with the corner of the glove box. Pain ripped across her face, and stunned, Lucy staggered backwards, seeing her own blood dripping down the perspex and over the white gloves inside. There too, staining with blood, was a little piece of electronics, and was only as Jack grabbed her again, and Lucy couldn't hear her own scream, that she realised her implant was gone. Jack was skinny, but he was tall, and he used his height and Lucy's shock to his advantage, spinning her around and forcing her up against the bookcase with his body. Lucy struggled, kicking and trying to scratch, but Jack was too close, and he grabbed her arms, pushing them down and pinning them by her sides. He spat words she couldn't hear into her face, his breath hot and fast against her skin, his body thrusting against her as she turned her face away and tried to wriggle free. She didn't need to hear to feel Jack's rage, and his arousal as well. His pupils were dilated, his muscles taut, and he was too strong. "No!" She kept fighting, pushing with her body and one arm as he let go of it and pressed his hand against her breast. Jack squeezed, his face more hatred than lust. That brought out all the fight Lucy had left, and with a snarl she slapped him hard over the ear with her palm. Lucy knew a lot about ears, and just as she had meant to, Jack wheeled away, screaming in her silent world and holding the side of his head. She'd made him angry, and the pain would not distract him long, so Lucy pushed herself away from the shelves, lurching towards the exit. She was so close that when fingers bent into claws reached for her again, she wailed and ducked away, tripping over her own feet and ending up in a heap at the bottom of the last stack. She threw her hands over her head as a shadow fell over her, but then freezing air flew past her face, and there was no blow. Peering through her arms, Lucy saw why. David was standing between her and Jack, his hands formed into fists by his side, his stance defiant. Jack looked surprised by the little boy, which is why he had stopped mid-swing. But he was not frightened. He spoke to the child, his features scrunched into a snarl, but neither David nor Lucy could hear him, and he spoke so fast Lucy could not read his lips. Scared for her small ally, ghost or not, Lucy glanced around for his mother, but Alison was nowhere to be seen. Then Jack was laughing and swinging at David. "No!" Lucy yelled, shifting to try and push herself up, but sharp pain daggered out from her wrist where she had landed on it, and she fell back in shock. Thus she could only watch as Jack's fist went sailing right through David. The boy's image flickered like a bad TV signal. Then it was Jack's turn to scream, because standing in front of him was no longer a sweet child, but a charred corpse, bones blackened, muscles twisted from old fire. Those flames leapt up all over David's body as he stalked forward, and Jack, eyes now wide, mouth hanging open in terror, staggered backwards. He fell over his own feet, but continued to crawl away from the spectre, under a reading table, any wails of terror silent to Lucy as she watched with relief. However, before David could reach his quarry, a warm body came running over to Lucy, a woman in midlife, who knelt down next to her and signed, "Are you all right?" Across the way, Alison appeared in front of David and signed, "Enough." David flickered once more and his shape returned to human. Lucy tried to sit up again, and was helped by the woman she guessed to be Jennifer Frith, but she was looking at David as the little boy turned away from the gibbering heap under the table and smiled at her. She did not have a smile, but she signed, "Thank you." Alison took David's hand, and then, as the front doors to the restricted section flew open, they faded away as one. Lucy swiped away into the restricted section and began walking down the middle aisle. It had only been 2 days since the attack, and Lucy was sore, and her world was silent as she waited for the repairs on her implant. But she didn't need to hear to talk to the people she wanted to see. She headed towards her reading desk, and putting her stuff down on the table signed, "David? Alison?" She couldn't help a little tremor of the unusual when David walked out of the shadows, but she wasn't afraid. "Hello," she greeted with a smile as the boy eyed her warily. "Aren't you scared of me now?" he checked nervously, hanging close to the shelving. Lucy shook her head, and hope flashed across the child's features, but he still looked doubtful. "You helped me, and I wanted to say thank you," Lucy signed. "But you saw the bad me." David looked ashamed then, and Lucy asked, "What's wrong?" "That's the me when I get scared or angry," he admitted, staying at the edge of the area. "From when I was burnt." "You saved me." Lucy pulled 2 seats out, sat in one and patted the other. Then she waited as David decided what he was going to do. Eventually, he came and sat in the seat facing Lucy, and she felt the slight chill of his presence. The boy still wasn't happy, and he hung his head when he told her, "But I killed Mummy." Alison was instantly there right beside the chair, and she reached out to her son. He was crying when she picked him up and took his place in the chair while he curled into her body and she rocked him. "It was an accident," she spoke to Lucy slowly so she could read her lips. "David put his coat on a heater in the storeroom to dry it out. It caught fire, and the flames trapped him. I tried to reach him, but he was overcome by smoke." Lucy's heart went out to the mother and son, their love clearly visible before her. "Can't you move on?" she asked, even though it felt intrusive. Alison shook her head. "Not yet." "Your sister," Lucy signed in a flash of inspiration. Alison nodded. "Jenny took our deaths very hard. She needs a friend." "I brought her a thank you present," Lucy signed quickly, and then tapped the box on the table. "She was so kind to me, stayed with me at the hospital, even when the police interviewed me, but when I fell asleep, she slipped away. Jenny is very shy. She is reshelving at the back today." Lucy took the hint and stood up. David peeked up at her from under his fringe. "Thank you," she signed to both ghosts. "I shall go and find Jenny." Lucy smiled at David. "You are my hero," she told him.